Welcome to this video about an introduction to autism, part 4 of 4, interventions. What is an intervention? Within the SEND graduated approach, an intervention is a targeted and time-limited form of support, which is additional to class-based high-quality teaching and reasonable adjustments. That is, this support is additional to autism supportive classroom strategies, more personalised class-based differentiation, and the provision of ordinarily available equipment, resources, and assessment modifications in regular lessons. Sometimes interventions can take place within regular lessons, reducing withdrawal time and maximising the opportunities for the pupil to transfer or link their knowledge and skills. Some interventions need to take place away from regular lessons and can be scheduled during school time or as part of the extended school day. For example, early mornings and in the afternoon. When do we need to consider putting in place interventions? If a pupil is not making good progress from their starting points and/or is at risk of not reaching their academic potential, despite adaptive strategies within high-quality teaching, it is time to consider putting in place one or more interventions. This can also be the case if a pupil's well-being is a concern. This is part of the assess, plan, do, review cycle. If the pupil has not been fully assessed and diagnosed as autistic, it is also important to evaluate the impact of any interventions provided to the pupil, alongside high-quality teaching, reasonable adjustments, and the provision of any additional equipment and resources when exploring whether a profile of autism is likely. Triggers for considering putting in place interventions. It is important to ensure that you have the regular opportunity to scrutinise routinely available progress data for autistic pupils, with the use of robust data tracking tools and supported by pupil progress monitoring systems. The key aims of this work are to quickly pick up concerns around fairly small steps progress and to identify data trends in their performance and engagement and behaviour for learning. For an autistic pupil, concerns may be more prevalent in lessons and less structured times where there are greater social and sensory demands. Additional sources of evidence include pupil work samples, specific assessment data, for example tests, and views provided by the pupil and their parents during meetings. Are evidence-based interventions always effective for autistic pupils? The answer is no. Some interventions that may have a strong evidence base will not always work effectively for autistic pupils due to their unique and varying learning profiles. It is important to critically examine the evidence, to seek professional advice and guidance if available, and to refer to publications which steer you in the right direction. Types of interventions. Interventions for autistic pupils often focus on developing skills in one or more of the following areas: communication, recognizing feelings, social skills, emotional and behavioral regulation, sensory regulation, mental health, study skills including executive functioning, and fine and gross motor skills including handwriting or touch typing. Sessions to progressively teach the use of visuals to support communication. Some autistic pupils, mostly young children in mainstream schools, find it difficult to understand spoken words, signs, symbols, or photos. Understanding real objects is the first stage of symbolic development. An object of reference is any object which is used systematically to represent an item, activity, place, or person. Therefore, using objects is considered the most concrete way of representing a word. The object can be a real object, for example, a toilet roll, to represent going to the toilet. Part of a real object, for example, part of a towel equals bath time. Miniature objects, for example, a toy desk equals it is time to work. And abstract objects, for example, a silk scarf, may be representing a particular person. They are used to help children understand what is happening in their environment and can also help them to make choices. Here are some objects of reference. Sessions to progressively teach the use of visuals to support communication. The next stage of teaching visuals to support communication is to pair photos of items with objects of reference, so that the pupil knows that they both mean the same thing. Then progress on to pairing photos with symbols, to help the pupil move on to using symbols. This supports work using communication systems such as Picture Exchange Communication System, PECS, where necessary. Speech and Language and Communication Need Interventions, SLCN. SLCN interventions will be appropriate for some autistic pupils and those pupils who are presenting with related social communication differences. Some pupils also require support with early communication, usually young children in primary schools, including sign-supported language. Sessions to progressively teach the use of visuals to support the understanding of emotions. Many autistic pupils, especially young children, will need to learn how to recognize emotions first through being taught about facial expressions. This is necessary before interventions and strategies that use symbols and systems for regulation are consolidated. Sessions to progressively teach the use of visuals to support the understanding of emotions. We've introduced self-regulation resources in the previous video, as they are part of classroom-based support and reasonable adjustments. For this to work effectively, pupils will need to be given discrete opportunities to learn about and practice their use of these tools. The 3-point and 5-point scales can be applied to anxiety, anger, and sensory difficulties. This could be specific, for example, noise. The scales allow the pupil to recognize their own emotional state. This can be used alongside the explicit teaching of feeling words. Zones of regulation. The Zones of Regulation is a systematic program to teach regulation, including a developmental sequence of lessons. This intervention and system is used in many schools. Sessions to progressively teach the use of visuals to support the understanding of emotions. Pupils can then move on to sessions where they are taught to use more sophisticated tools to develop their emotional understanding. Examples include using a feelings or emotions wheel and resources such as the Big Book of Feelings, as well as creative methods, for example through music, art, drama, and puppets. Social stories. Social stories created by Carol Gray often contain information that most people assume everybody knows. As we know, autistic pupils may find it harder to put themselves in someone else's shoes and predict what others are thinking. They may assume others are thinking the same as them. This means that social situations are unpredictable and confusing. Telling them the same thing lots of times doesn't work. Social stories give logic and structure to non-concrete situations. Although they're not foolproof, you can edit and have sequels. Social stories. Social stories help autistic people of all ages to develop self-care skills, for example, how to get dressed, manage social situations, for example, asking for help, taking turns in conversations, understand how others might behave or respond in a particular situation to understand different perspectives, prepare for and cope with changes to routine and unexpected or distressing events, for example, teacher absence, school trips, thunderstorms, etc. Use strategies to self-manage their emotions and behaviour, for example, what to do when angry, how to cope with people who upset you, etc. And develop their self-esteem to provide positive feedback about an area of strength or achievement. Social stories. Social stories need to be made age-appropriate. Use of symbols and the written language used will vary depending on the pupil's age and stage of development, as well as their communication profile. Social stories. Consider the individual. These formats for social stories are examples that may be more appropriate for older pupils. Social stories. We need to think critically about the content of social stories. For example, in this social story, giving cues for a set of repeating events, we can see that Nicholas always listens to instructions. Might it be more effective to write tries to listen to instructions? Social stories. Social stories can be used as whole class reminders. This means that target individuals do not stand out or feel they are being highlighted. General principles for writing social stories. For more information, see resources from Carol Gray, who first created social stories. Comic strip conversations. Comic strip conversations allow the adult and pupil to slow down a conversation and analyse it, to find out what the problem was. They can be used to consider possible different endings, what could be done next time to improve the outcome. They are visual, non-confrontational, and avoid blame. And they help the person explain their view and see the perspectives of others. In this example, basically, Ben said to the child that he can play with the ball. He means just for a break, but the child assumes forever and refuses to return it. Ben tells the teacher, who tries to sort it out. This shows what people say and probably feel and think. How to create a comic strip conversation. Number 1, sit with the child. Number 2, draw the beginning of the situation, who was there and what was happening. 3, together draw thought and speech bubbles to show what happened and what everyone was probably thinking. Use a new section for each step. And then discuss what happened, work out what the problem was, and how it can be dealt with. Suggest alternative endings for next time. Remember, they may not have any idea what others were thinking, so you will need to make suggestions or investigate first. Comic strip conversations. You can also create scenarios and then turn them into comic strips to show different ways it could turn out. What is missing from this comic strip? The answer is the man's thoughts and feelings. This could have several outcomes. Social skills interventions. Most autistic pupils will learn through reactions from people, so they need exposure to social situations with neurotypical peers. Remember that the pupil's existing social skills are not wrong, they are different. This needs to be worked on in a supportive way, so there is a chance for questions and to repair any issues. Social skills interventions can include structured programs and facilitated and scaffolded sessions with less structure. Both are valuable because an autistic pupil will need to learn strategies and scripts to cope in social situations where they may feel uncomfortable, not know what to say or do, and not understand the unwritten rules. Intensive interaction for pupils at very early developmental levels. Intensive interaction is a practical and specialist approach to interacting with people which can be appropriate for autistic children at very early developmental levels, typically pre-verbal. As profiles of need change within mainstream schools, it is an approach that is being incorporated into early social skills interventions in some primary schools. Attention autism. Attention autism is an intervention approach developed by speech and language therapist Gina Davies, which aims to work on the early fundamentals of language, including awareness of others, attention, listening, shared attention, switching attention, and turn-taking. Attention autism uses autistic children's areas of strength to scaffold learning. It aims to engage them by using highly motivating activities and using this to introduce other skills, including joint attention, turn-taking, and vocabulary development. The aim is to get spontaneous engagement from the child. Talkabout. Talkabout is a low-cost structured program for teaching and measuring social skills used by many schools. It is a whole scheme of ready-made work. Talkabout uses a hierarchical method of teaching social skills, which means they've assessed the child using the Talkabout assessment. Staff can choose the appropriate level or book to start work at. This is not only for autistic pupils and will not be suitable for all autistic pupils. Other resources to support structured social skills interventions. The Language for Behaviour and Emotions resource and the Social Use of Language program are practical and popular tools, particularly in secondary schools. Facilitating social experiences. A social skills intervention can also include planned intentional exposure to semi-structured social situations. For example, clubs with a specific purpose, such as Lego building, chess, sewing, crafts, robotics, sports, and so on. This facilitates positive, enjoyable social experiences with other pupils who have shared interests. Sometimes these sessions can be organised within lesson times. They can also be before school, during lunch breaks, and after school. Staff organising these sessions should consider whether an autistic pupil could have targets to work on during these sessions, such as finding out about another pupil or initiating a conversation. It is important to base this on what the pupil feels they would like to work on, especially if they are old enough to identify this with support. Sensory circuits. A sensory circuit is a form of sensory integration intervention. It involves a sequence of physical activities that are designed to alert, organise and calm the pupil. The sensory circuit aims to facilitate sensory processing, to help the pupil to regulate and organise their senses in order to achieve the just right or optimum level of alertness required for effective learning. The circuit should be an active and fun activity. Sensory circuits should ideally be completed at school, first thing in the morning, and after lunch too, where possible. The activities can also be utilised at different times of the day as part of a wider sensory program, known as a sensory diet, to help the pupil to self-regulate. Sensory circuits are designed to start with alerting activities, move on to an organising phase, and then finally to a calming phase. Study skills support. Autistic pupils in upper key stage 2 and above can sometimes find it helpful to receive additional and explicit guidance to develop their study and learning to learn skills. This can cover, for example, understanding how they learn, organising their work, improving their memory, learning new information and researching, presenting their work, preparing for assessments and exams, and exam techniques. Study and homework after school provision. Some autistic pupils can find homework and self-directed study and coursework a significant challenge. This can be due to a range of reasons, which we have explored in earlier sessions of this program, including difficulties with rigidity of thought, attention, concentration, and personal organisational skills. It can therefore be very beneficial to offer a study or homework provision in your school. This provision can simply provide a space for undertaking work with adult support when needed. It can also possibly include more structured sessions, which can model effective study habits, optional and extra interventions, and enrichment activities. A mentor or key worker. Autistic pupils can benefit enormously from having one trusted adult as their key worker, a person who can listen and respond to their views about what is working for them and what isn't. This might be a TA, a learning mentor, or an emotional literacy support assistant, ELSA, or another member of staff who is available for check-ins and perhaps more structured, time-limited sessions. This type of provision can help pupils to understand and regulate their emotions, both through verbal communication and by using strategies that they've learned through some of the interventions we've covered in this video. A pupil might need support from time to time to resolve issues relating to peers, monitor their own emotions or behaviours to identify potential triggers and identify. This can be supported through the use of resources that we've outlined in previous videos, but can also include other techniques. For example, psychoeducation sessions about anxiety, teaching breathing techniques, body relaxation, and mindfulness techniques. These may need to be adapted, for example, using visual supports. This type of support can also extend to coordinated pastoral supports, for example, organising extracurricular activities, setting up a buddy system, organising a restorative justice session or circle of friends, creating and sourcing new personalised resources, liaising with teachers to modify high-quality teaching adaptive strategies, and reasonable adjustments. Therapy. For some autistic pupils, time-limited therapy provided by a qualified and registered counsellor or play therapist can be an appropriate and helpful additional support. Typically, this will be considered if other interventions are not having sufficient impact, where there are persistent and significant concerns that the pupil is experiencing emotional or mental health difficulties. This can include, for example, anxiety and low mood. There are a wide range of therapy modalities. Some pupils, especially younger children, may be appropriate for play-based therapy. Some pupils may respond well to solution-focused cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT, while others might find a less directive talking therapy more helpful. Creative therapies are another option. This depends on the pupil's age, their life experiences and preferences. The National Autistic Society provides a good practice guide for therapists working in schools and in other settings. Enhanced social-emotional learning sessions linked with the curriculum. Autistic pupils may need adapted or enhanced PSHE programs replacing or supplementing regular lessons. Autistic people are at greater risk of exploitation, grooming, and are vulnerable to becoming involved in risky situations unknowingly. They are also at greater risk of being seen as inappropriate by others if they get things wrong. Some autistic pupils may therefore need very clear, factual, and detailed information about things such as changes at puberty and sexual relationships, what is and isn't okay, and what to do if they are unsure. It is important that school and home communicate to ensure misunderstandings are clarified. Suggesting strategies to parents and carers. It is very important to work in effective partnership with the pupil's parents or carers to try to establish strategies which can apply both at school and at home. Sometimes it can be helpful to record and monitor this in the form of a home-school partnership plan so that approaches between school and home are as consistent and complementary as possible. Examples include setting routines and expectations, tactical use of prompts and reminders, using visual aids, breaking down information and instructions, structuring time, access to clubs and activities, support with homework, incentive systems, etc. In some cases, a pupil and their parents or carers might benefit from more regular contact from at least one key member of school staff. If so, this should incorporate good news and tangible evidence of achievement wherever possible and in whatever form. Measuring progress from non-academic intervention supports. The AET progression framework is intended to assist staff in identifying areas where autistic pupils may require additional support, so that specific programs can be planned and implemented. It can also provide evidence of the effectiveness of such support. Measuring progress from non-academic interventions and supports. CERTS is a purchasable autism-specific assessment and tracking tool that provides a systematic method that ensures that specific skills and appropriate supports, stated as educational objectives, are selected and applied in a consistent manner across a child's day. Considering an autism assessment. If a pupil presents strongly and frequently with social communication difficulties which strongly indicate a wide range of autism traits, both at school and at home, plus school-based activities have been carried out to identify signs of social communication difficulties and autism traits, plus a range of appropriate class-based strategies have been implemented by teachers and teaching assistants, plus appropriate intervention has been put in place and evaluated for impact, and the pupil is not making good progress from their starting points, or there are persistent concerns about their well-being. At this stage of the SEN graduated approach, the school and parents and carers should consider a clinical assessment. Referrals for autism assessment. Remember that the DSM-5 manual defines autism spectrum disorder, ASD, as persistent difficulties with social communication and social interaction, and restricted and repetitive patterns of behaviours, activities or interests, present since early childhood to the extent that these limit and impair everyday functioning. A paediatrician will only consider a diagnosis of ASD for a child or young person where there is no doubt that they meet the diagnostic criteria for this lifelong neurodevelopmental condition. So it is important to have clear and compelling evidence of this from both school and home. Appointment with a diagnostic service. An appointment to assess autism usually includes a diagnostic interview with the parent and an observation. This is often a direct assessment activity with the child or young person. Once the assessment has been completed, the parent or carer may be sent a letter to invite them to a face-to-face feedback meeting with the assessment team. It is common for the education setting to also be included at this meeting, subject to parental preference. Psychoeducation for the pupil if they are diagnosed. Psychoeducation involves providing information to the pupil about autism, including what it is, recognizing strengths, differences, and common difficulties, and how to manage their needs effectively as part of their day-to-day life in school and outside school. Using access arrangements for controlled assessments and exams. Does the pupil now need extra time, typically 25% extra, to complete an assessment if under test conditions? Does the pupil require rest breaks? Does the pupil need to complete an assessment outside the classroom, under staff supervision? If the answer is yes to any of these, especially for controlled assessments and exams, it is important to ensure that autistic pupils are provided with explicit instruction in how to make best use of the access arrangements they are entitled to. This is the end of this video. You can view more videos on this channel in the About series.